What's up, Moto buddies? Mike here, Baja Taco Tours and Taco Moto Co. Today, we're going to have this discussion about all the ECU products, tuning products that are available. It's 2021 right now. It's mid-May 2021. And these are all products that are either new for this year, or we're going to discuss some of the ways that these are backwards compatible. So we've got some new things that are for future bikes, new bikes, 21s and up, and then some other things are for previous generation bikes, and we'll kind of break all that down, talk about what they are. But I've got these basically oriented on the table here in the way that these represent the two different levels of fuel management. So down here I've got stock ECUs. These are Kahini ECUs, and then I've got two generations of them. We have the ones with 36 pins. These are 3 rows, or rather 2 rows of 36 pins. These are for the 12 through 16 enduro bikes, or the 11 through 15 MX bikes, specifically for KTMs. And that's this larger footprint ECU. And then for the 17 plus enduro or 16 plus MX bikes, they have a 33. There's a 3 rows of 11 33 pin ECU. And so these are the two different ECUs. This ECU is for the bikes that have the throttle body with the red and yellow knob, and then this ECU is for the bikes that have just the pull choke knob, or it's just a fast idle circuit knob. And so that's the difference between these two ECUs, and you can tell which one you have based on how you do your choke on your bike. It's either the black knob on the left of the body or it's the yellow knob. So that's these two right here. And then this row of devices, these are piggyback tuners. So what happens with these is you leave and maintain the stock unmolested. You don't do anything to your ECU, and in many instances, and we'll talk about that in a second, you can't any longer. So you've got your stock ECU, and then these are devices that sort of live on top of your stock ECU and your stock map, and then they make fuel correction to the stock map, and that's why they're generically called piggyback tuners. And these are often less costly. In some instances, they're plug and play. In some instances, you need to do a small little programming to set them up properly for the bike and the mods you have. But these often are less costly. They offer fewer features. They're sometimes a little more straightforward, although not always. And they offer fuel correction. So your bike runs on ignition and fuel. And then these devices are like fuel management devices. They enhance the fueling of the bike. They don't do anything with the ignition. And so that's that row of devices. And then back here we have ECUs. These offer you the ability to manage and control both the ignition and the fueling. And then they offer enhanced features that the stock ECU may be capable of, but on your particular bike, in your particular country that you buy your bike, it may not even have those features available. So some countries with certain bikes will have features that aren't available in other countries. With an aftermarket ECU, you're changing the ignition and the fuel, and then you have like all the options, all the bells and whistles. There are features and benefits that you can get from these manufacturers because they are not constrained by jurisdictions, by regulatory jurisdictions, because all of these products represent components that are for off-road race use, competition use only. And so they have not been administered by the regulatory agency of the country of origin for your bike or country of use. And so it's almost unlimited, really, to the extent of the certain features and options that are available in these. So this is just sort of the lay of the land of what we'll talk about. And then we're going to start with ECUs and work backwards. So the highest level of performance enhancement and the best sort of feature package is going to come with the ECUs, and we'll start there, and then we'll go back down and work our way until we get back down to like the stock ECUs. So we'll put these over to the corner, and I think we'll start with the Get ECU, because the Get ECU represents sort of the top of the pyramid in terms of what's available and the feature set for any of the ECUs. So this is really, we'll start with the best and go backwards from there. Get ECU, retail on this is $8.99, and when you get it at that level, what comes in the package is the Wi-Fi module, and then a map switch and the ECU itself. So that's $8.99 package. And the Wi-Fi COM module allows you to gain access to certain features that are inside of the software and the firmware, the utility. That lets you look at trouble codes. So it basically becomes a scan tool and you're looking at trouble codes in the ECU. There is live data available, and that's coming for the KTM product. Right now it's available for Suzuki. So if you have this ECU, Get ECU in your Suzuki, you can go through the app and you can look at live sensor data, which is incredible. It's super rad. KTM does not have that available yet, and it's coming soon. It's just an app update from Athena. Hopefully that comes out this summer. It's long delayed with this COVID stuff, but we're looking for it soon. So through the app, you can make changes to the mapping. You can make ignition and fuel changes as a user on the fly. Let's say you're in Baja, Mexico, and you get a tank of bad gas, and your bike is pinging a little bit. Well, you can jump into the app, create a profile for that particular type of map, and then you can pull away some ignition, maybe add a little bit of fuel. I can help coach you through that, or you may be experienced yourself. But you can make specific changes to the map to allow for certain conditions. Maybe you want to do a track day and you want to up the ignition because you're running a hot premium fuel. You can do that. Some of the other things you can do in the app are like little maintenance logs. So there's like a section in there where you can go in and you can just record into the ECU things you're doing to the bike maintenance wise. So every time you do an oil change, filter change, you adjust the valves, you rebuilt the top end, whatever, you can type that information, you can log and record that and store that information inside of the ECU. So you have a permanent record of what you've done to the bike, and then when you sell it, then you don't have to go around and find a bunch of papers or logbooks or whatever. It's logged into the ECU, and that's a really cool feature. The Get ECU also has a barometric pressure sensor, so that's looking at ambient pressure, and then that's averaging that and using that data in conjunction with the bike's manifold pressure sensor. So you're enhancing its altitude compensation characteristics. The map switch allows you to toggle in between the two maps that are hard-coded into the ECU. And when you buy this from Taco Moto, we preload 2 exceptional award-winning maps into here. The most common setup, the most desired setup, is to have map 1 be a full-out race mode map. That's just like wide open power. And then map 2 is a very, very good off-road enduro map that is very trackable and as linear as possible, so that your bike has less tendency for like whiskey throttle and just explosive power. If you're riding a bike like a 500, you know that that's a torque machine, it's a torque monster, and it can feel very snappy and abrupt in the low throttle angles, especially if you're doing like single track work and you're just barely trying to feather into the throttle. That power can be an abrupt hit. And so it mutes and manages that and does a very good job of that. So the Get as a platform is exceptionally powerful. It offers features that are not available or not as good in other ECU packages. So that app stuff, that's Get only. If you're familiar with Yamaha, their Power Tune app, it is exactly the same. In fact, some of that's the technology from Athena. Now, KTM in model year 22 is coming out with, I think it's called a My Tune, or I forget what it is, but for the KTM bikes, it's not an Athena product. It's not as feature rich. That's not to say it doesn't offer some nice benefits. It does, but it is not the same package, and it doesn't have the app with as many features and functions. So that's your map switch, your Wi-Fi module. There's probably other features, things that I forgot to mention as far as what the app gives you. And then the, something too that is important, because you can look into trouble codes. If your bike trips a code, you can jump into the app and then you can see what that trouble code was, and that will give you very good indication of what system you need to look at. And then either you yourself, because you're an experienced mechanic and you understand what those trouble codes are and the direction they're pointing you, you might be able to make some repairs on your own based on that data, or you can text it to me. I get a lot of guys who will call me and they want to know what a code means or how to fix their bike, and then they'll text me some of that data, and then I can help steer them in the right direction, or their mechanic in the right direction, to make those repairs. So there's just amazing features with the Get ECU. You can add on an accessory traction control knob. So this gives you the ability to dial in 10 modes of traction control. Now, there are other components that we'll talk about that have traction control, and they're specifically either a soft map or dynamic traction control, but with just an on and off toggle. So what is the difference between, so dynamic traction control, let's talk about that. That's what Get has, that's what Athena uses. And so dynamic traction control, what's happening there is the system is monitoring wheel spin, but not through a wheel speed sensor, because we don't have those on our small bikes. You do on big bikes. So what's going on with that is the system is looking at the throttle position in relation to engine RPM. And so if engine RPM spikes relative to throttle position, because it's monitoring the way it would work if you had traction, is your throttle plate is opening at a same arc, at a same vector as your RPM. So the two of them are going up in parallel with each other at a certain rate. Now, if RPM spikes, but throttle position stays relatively the same, that means you lost traction. The rear wheel broke loose, and so engine RPM spiked. It jumped. And so that imbalance of tracking is what triggers the system then to go into traction control override, and then it's going to pull away some fuel and pull away ignition. And it does it with the Get, it does it very smoothly, very subtly, and dynamically in real time. And it's essential. It's game changing. I've come to find it as like one of the best features that I like about the Get ECU, and it's hugely popular, and a lot of demand is driven towards the Get ECU primarily because of the app, the barometric pressure sensor, and then the traction control. And so with the knob, you have authority over the level of traction control. So 1 through 10, the modes, you can activate that on the fly in any map. So you can, I've got guys who like map 1 with a little bit of traction control, or map 2 with full traction control. And let me speak to that really quick. Because that map 2 is that linear off-road map, when you're in that mode and you dial in like level 10 traction control, you've got a bike that's so usable and adaptable to off-road conditions. So if you're a guy who's, you're not a professional rider, you don't have 10,000 hours in the seat, and so getting on your 500 and doing some single track, or even your 350, which are so powerful these days, the Ktm 350s are, you can let your bike through these little technology components, these rider's aids, work for you rather than against you. So your bike is no longer trying to murder you every time you blip the throttle to try to get over something. It's incredible for energy management, for rider confidence. These pieces of technology are just really game changing. They're allowing here's what's also amazing, is they're allowing older riders to stay in the sport longer. So a bike that would have sort of aged out, the machines in some instances can age out the riders in that they're just so capable, so powerful. One side thought is it's very, very easy to make a bike more powerful and more explosive. That's not a problem. Here's what's challenging, is to make a bike more rideable. That's what's really key, is your bike doing you a service through good use of its technology, and then its ability to sort of like keep you on the bike for longer, if that makes sense. So the Get ECU system is really doing that, and we're helping older riders stay on their bike longer and have more confidence, and also ride longer days. Guys are able to put in 8 or 10 hour days in the saddle, where maybe previously, before these sorts of systems, they might have like tapped out at 3 or 4 hours, and so they're just able to ride longer on their bike. So kind of to summarize, the Get ECU system really comes in sort of 2 versions, and I'll just sort of give you a visual here. Again, this is what you get with the $8.99 package. That's the ECU, and then the map and the Wi-Fi. Now you can get it as a ECU only, and that's $7.79, and that gives you just the ECU and just the map switch. The thing that you have to do with any of these ECUs is you have to calibrate the TPS into the ECU. And so if you have the Wi-Fi comm module, then you'll go into the app and then you'll zero out the TPS there, and that gives you that option. Now, if you don't have the Wi-Fi, you just lose the Wi-Fi features. Maybe you're the kind of guy, who would want one version over the other. So if you wanted the lower price point, $779, and you didn't care about the Wi-Fi features because it's just high-tech stuff that you don't care about, that's cool. Then I think this is the way to go. And then how you'll calibrate the TPS with this is there is a very simple and easy to follow procedure using the on and off switch on your bike that will allow you to calibrate the TPS into the app. And so you do not need to have the Wi-Fi module to operate the Get ECU system. And if you have this setup, then it's a very simple, in 5 minutes, you've plugged this into your bike, installed the map switch. It might take a few more minutes. You're gonna wanna run the cable up under the gas tank. But you get the idea. It's very quick. You just plug in your ECU, you calibrate the TPS, and you're off riding. And while there are crazy, incredible features and benefits that are available with the platform, if you don't have the Wi-Fi and you don't want to screw around with the app, you don't have to at all. So that's the base system. Now, if you wanted to add on to any of the packages, you can add on the traction control knob to give you the traction control functions and features that we just talked about. And it doesn't matter if you have the app and the Wi-Fi or not, you can just add that. And you can add it at any time. You don't have to get it now when you install it. You just plug it in. It doesn't need to be reflashed. Nothing needs to happen. You just plug it in and away you go. And then there is a Y-splitter cable, because if you did want to have both the Wi-Fi and the traction control on your bike at the same time, you only get one pigtail for either one of these. And so you could use a Y-splitter to plug them both in and then plug that into the ECU. And so now you can run all this. So if you did all that, that's like all the bells and whistles. If you're a super techie kind of guy, and give you every function and feature possible with the system. So that is the Get package and sort of how it looks and how it works. This is the system that I use. So if you want to know what my preference is, this is what I run on my own personal bikes, because I want all the features. I use them, I exploit them, and we're constantly doing development work on these. Our maps are amazing. There's lots of places to get these out there. You can buy these on eBay. But nobody is going to support you. Nobody's going to serve you the way that I think you need to be handled when you've got a system like this. And then our maps are second to none. So that is the overview of the Get ECU system and package. So moving on. The Vortex ECU is definitely the most widely known ECU, aftermarket ECU out there in dirt biking. And for good reason. It's been around a long time because it's so good and so popular because of the fact it just works. It works really damn good. It's a very simple little box. It's as plug and play as the base Get unit is, in that you swap out your stock ECU and then you go through a simple procedure to set your points, your TPS points, and then you're off and you're riding. Most guys ride this, as I've learned, a lot of guys just take this out of the box and then ride it with the maps and the dial settings that come with this. So where the Get offers you options and the ability to go in and fine-tune the fuel and ignition to specific profile points that you're after, the Vortex lets you, as a user, do that to the fuel. So you've got these little three wheels right here for the fuel trims, and there's low, medium, and high. And so basically, if you took almost like carb jetting, you know, you've got your three circuits, your needle, and then your pilot and your main. You've got the ability in a carburetor to adjust and fine-tune those three fuel circuits. The Vortex sort of is giving you that same adaptability, I guess. And so when you make fuel trim corrections in here, 5 is the standard setting. So default, when this thing comes to you out of the box, all these are going to be set to 5, and that's the 0 value. 0 fuel is being added or taken away. So the trim level at 5 is really a 0. Every time you move that up, you move it up a percentage. So you add a percentage of fuel by clicking from 6 and then to 7 and 8 and so on. And then anything below 5 does the same thing, but to take away fuel. So theoretically, you could take either one of these to, in fact, I'll kind of mention that again. You could take one of these to your dyno shop if you wanted to. These are all going to come with a standard tune that was based on your specific bike model. And that tune was created by the tuning house. So Vortex themselves created these tunes. When you buy a Get, we've created those tunes. And those are based on a bike that is gonna be like yours, and that it's the same model as yours. and then using a specific set of modifications. So if we tell you that we want you to run like open exhaust, then that means you're using any type of aftermarket exhaust, or you're using like a like you could use the Xcf exhaust on your Exc-f. So that would be like the motocross pipe. Some guys throw those on. You could also take the end cap off your stock bike. We've got videos that talk about that and why you might want to do that. And then throw on something like a Pro Moto billet, which gives you now an open flow exhaust. So with like the Get tunes, we tell you it's an open flow exhaust, and then maybe the reeds are out. And the same thing is happening with the Vortex. So while they're not creating the map for your exact bike, the one you own, they're creating a bike that's got a profile based on mods that you're going to want to do and copy on your bike. Now, because it's not your exact bike and you've got how many hours on your engine, and there's variables. So what you could do theoretically, if you wanted to go down that rabbit hole, is you could take your bike and your ECU to a dyno shop where they could fine tune and customize that setup for your specific bike. And they may end up adding 1 or 2 numbers here and taking 1 or 2 numbers away, or not. Maybe the tune is bang on exactly right for your machine. But that option is available to you if you wanted to go down that rabbit hole. Now, you could also find a tuner who has the software specific. So that would be ways you could make those simple adjustments. And on the Get, you could do that in the app. You could also then find a tuner that has the software. So like the programming software from Vortex or Get, and they would then go into the utility and make really high-level professional grade changes to the map that would specifically adapt it to your very machine. So do you need to do that? No, absolutely not. There are guys that do it, and they tell me about it, and I coach some of these guys through that. I don't do that on my own personal bikes. Look, the time and expense and effort to get maybe 0.5% additional power everywhere, maybe you're scratching for like 1%, if that, it's not worth it to me. But there are guys that do that. So I'm just explaining that's an option that's available. The other knob you'll see over here is the map knob on the Vortex. So the Vortex has 10 maps that are set up inside of it. And when you get your unit, go through and look at your maps. There's a ton of them that are not very suitable for most guys. And some of them are kind of a little bit hard to understand exactly what it is they're trying to tell you that map is specifically suited for. And sometimes they're suited for bikes that are not your bike. Sometimes they'll tell you it's for a race map application, or I'm sorry, a race gas application, and then engine modifications. So often the 2 most popular maps, here's what they are. They're typically 1 and 2, map 1 and 2. And they're set up very similar to how we do the Get. And that is map 1 would be race map, wide open power, just full power. And then map 2 would be like an off-road type enduro map. And those are the most popular. So the the map switch is an optional accessory. Not a lot of guys get these with the Vortex, and I think that's a shame, because this is a really powerful tool. It's only like 69 bucks. Most guys with Vortexes don't get this, and I wish they would, because what you can do with this is you can toggle in between 2 maps, and I would strongly recommend that you set the dial on here to map 2, because when you're in the map 1 position, so I don't know if you can see this, but one of the positions say map 1, and then the other one is like the X10, how that works is when you're in the map 1 position, you're in the map 1, you're running map 1 here in the ECU. When you click it to it's not map 2, but it's like the X10. When you click it there, then it responds to wherever you've set the dial 1 through 10 on that map. My recommendation for almost everybody is get the map switch, have this set to map 2, so that you're toggling in between full power race map and then off-road map. And I really like the off-road map. I think it's very good. And then that's the map that you'll use when you're out trail riding and in single track and technical stuff. Now the Vortex, also with the newer firmware models, and you'll have to look at your instructions to see if you have this, but you have available to you something called dynamic traction control, and it works very similar to how the Get ECU system works, in that it's looking at throttle position relative to engine RPM. And you get into that mode by, when the bike is running, you just you blip the start button that puts it into that dynamic traction mode, and then the check engine light on your bike will blink rapidly. It'll pulse at you, which is a visual indication that you're in that traction control mode. And I've spent a little time playing with it, and it is, I believe it's noticeable. If I'm going to be honest and compare with the Get ECU, the Get system is it's better than any of the other traction controls out there. That's because it has the sweep of 1 through 10, and level 10 is crazy noticeable, and it is incredibly effective. This to me felt like it was around level 3 or 4, maybe 5 on the sweep for the Get. So it is nice. And if you have the Vortex ECU, and if this is your ECU of choice, then I think you should exploit that feature and use it. Again, look at your instructions, and it will tell you to blip the start button to trigger into that mode. So it's just an on and off. It doesn't give you the ability to modulate it. It's just on or off, and it's preset. The intensity of it is preset. The other thing too, that because you don't have an app with the Vortex, you still have to set the endpoints, the TPS, and in your instructions there should be a little sheet, and there's a very simple procedure, just like with the Get ECU, with the kill button essentially to set the TPS, and so you're going to want to do that. So there's a couple of sort of under the hood features that a lot of guys may not know about. Look at your instructions. You can also have your older ECU reflashed with the newer version firmware, so that you can gain access to some of these features. And if you have questions about this, you can shoot us an email and we can point you in the right direction to get that done. So if you have an older ECU and you're looking at your instructions, doesn't talk about traction control, and you wanted to add that, that's possible. So the Vortex ECU is less costly. The retail on this is $759. So it's a little bit less money, not much. It's right there neck and neck really with the Get ECU as a base system. So within a couple of bucks of each other, the Vortex and the Get system without the Wi-Fi are relatively about the same price. You know what the features, the extra features are with the Vortex. You know what the features are with the Get now. And so they're very comparable. And there are guys who sit on the fence often and they're like, well, they're both very similar in cost. Which one should I get? I think you just look for the one that has the features and maybe the expandability that you think is going to be best for you, and then go for that one. They're both great. I love them both. The processor speeds, the Get has a faster chipset, a faster processor speed, because it's doing more math. It's running the app, it's running a barometric pressure sensor, so it's got more data to handle, so it's got a bit of a faster processor speed, and that's something that guys tell me they can feel in the throttle responsiveness, that the Get feels a little crisp, a little sharper, a little more responsive. That's not to say that this is a slouch at all. The Vortex is a hell of a box, and you would do well to put this on your bike. It's very popular and very widely known. So far, everything we're going to talk about is submersible. It's waterproof, splash proof. You can wash your bike. You don't have to worry about any of that. All of these seals, all of these the connectors, they're all waterproof and watertight and water sealed, and everything's watertight here. So we don't have to worry about anything with that with any of these systems. So that's your rundown on the Vortex ECU. Okay, let's talk about Piggyback fuel controllers. So these are, let's start with the Dynojet because it is far and away the better of all of the options for a Piggyback tuner. Again, what's happening here is this thing plugs into your bike and it's using the map, the base map that's already in your ECU, and then it's making fuel corrections to the base map. So why would a guy want to use a Piggyback tuner versus a replacement ECU? Some of the main reasons are cost. So the retail on this is $399. So you can see that we're considerably less money than a replacement ECU, but we have no features. There's no traction control. There's nothing that this does. All of this thing is doing is it's correcting the fueling to your bike. If you want those sorts of features and bells and whistles, then it requires you to go to a replacement ECU platform. if you're the type of rider who none of that stuff matters to you, you don't give a crap about any of that stuff, all you want is correct fueling for your bike, good, accurate, correct fueling, then a piggyback tuner is very likely the way that you'd want to go, especially considering the money that you'll save and the reality that the raw horsepower numbers out of the Power Commander are often equal or within 1 or 2 percentage points of what we're getting out of the power numbers, the final full power numbers of the Vortex or the Get. Let me talk about that really quick. Often a product is touted with what its peak horsepower number is, and nobody, not nobody, but a lot of guys do not ride at peak RPM. So horsepower is relative to piston speeds, and where do you have the most piston speeds? You have them at max RPM. Not all bikes make max power right at max RPM. Sometimes they have a fall off point, but very often that peak horsepower number that's touted as like a sales number is created at almost or very near wide open throttle, wide open max RPM. I don't ride there. What I'm looking for is power often way down low or somewhere in the mid range. And all of these within 1 or 2 percentage points, the ECUs are making very similar power, and then the Power Commander, very similar. So if you're just asking the question, which makes the most power, typically it's one of the ECU products. And there are some, on some bikes and in some maps, the Get makes better power or more power, not better, more power. And in some bikes and some maps, the Vortex makes more power. So these, like, it's an unfair question that I get posed with occasionally, like, which is the better one? Which one makes more power? It sort of depends. Again, it depends on which map, and it depends on which bike, which application, and then which exhaust system have you put it on. Because every time you change a variable, then you move the number around just a small amount. I also get asked, can I get more power out of one of these? So a guy will put on a Vortex and I'll get the question, okay, it's awesome, my bike runs great, but I want a little more. Yes, you can get more power out of any of those when you get into the mapping and then you increase ignition or you increase fueling. The reason that these maps are set up the way they are and that those devices make the power that they do is because it is inferred and understood that you're running a stock internal bike, stock camshaft, and then pump gas. So these maps, as they're pre-configured, are set up to give you the best power, the most power, in the safest range with those bike parameters. We can get you more power. You can jump into the app of the Get, for example, and bump up those numbers. Now you are running on a ragged edge of survivability. You are looking at things now that are very detrimental to the life of your engine, the service life of your engine. So think about an optimally tuned, a race bike that's tuned at the ragged edge. That bike is always on the verge of blowing up. And often those tunes are created because they don't care about the engine. They just want that bike to run at that ultimate possible level, and they're going to rebuild it at the end of the race. And so they don't care. I mean, they care if the engine blows up, but they basically go to, a level 11 on the knob, and then they maybe dial it back a half a turn, and that's where they ride that bike for that race, and then they're going to rebuild the engine anyway. Guys who are running these products, we want these bikes to last 600 hours, 700 hours. So we don't push on those maps. We're not pushing the bike to that level. In fact, we know what those levels are, but very intentionally, we click those back quite a few numbers, a few levels, as it were, to keep the bike in a safe range to give you the best power, the most power, running pump gas on stock internals with bolt-on mods. So that's sort of the philosophy behind these maps. And all of these are going to make, I mean, everybody who's in this business knows what these sort of limit thresholds are. And so we all are sort of pushing up to that sort of top cap, that sort of self-imposed top cap, and we all sort of stop there. Because yes, we could go further, but we don't. We don't want phone calls from guys blowing up their bikes and banging off the rem limiter and blowing them up, or having tons of detonation. So we know what those top limits are, but we pull it back, we restrain it intentionally to keep your bike in a safe range. Now, if you are adding camshafts and big bore kits and all these extra things, then we can dial up the knob. You're running race fuel. You want custom tunes and custom maps. We can absolutely do that. And so you'd work with us to make that happen. But for everybody else, you've got a stock bike with some bolt-on mods and some changes, and then you just want the best, safest power for that situation. That's what a plug-and-play Vortex is for, a plug-and-play Get, or a power commander. So that's kind of what's going on with that. How this works is what it's doing is, so the fuel injector, the ECU is commanding the ignition coil, and it's setting the ignition profile based on the stock ignition map that's in here. And then there is a stock fuel map. Often when you've got, like, say, an Exc-f, that bike is a 50-state regulated machine. That is it's a street bike. So you're going to want to turn it into a dirt bike. And let me make a disclaimer here. Every single product that we're going to talk about is for a competition use off-road machine only. These are not street legal. These are not to be used for road use. This is off-road competition use only products and modifications. So there is your legal disclaimer. Do with that what you will. So as far as the power commander or a piggyback tuner, we'll talk about a couple more in a second. What's happening is this thing is monitoring the on cycle, or the runtime, the on duty runtime cycle of the fuel injector. So the fuel injector is basically an on and off switch. It's being commanded on and off by the ECU. And it's being commanded a certain pulse width, a certain number of times a second, and then the device takes that signal and then magnifies it. So it lengthens or shortens it based on the programming that's been set up inside of the firmware of the tuner. In the instance of the Dynojet, the reason why it's our favorite piggyback tuner is because how it's set up is it's looking at three forms of data. So we're looking at the fuel injector signal, and then we're looking at the throttle position sensor, and then we're looking at engine RPM. So we're taking three pieces of data to make the calculations about what we should do with the fueling of a very specific cell. So if you think about a spreadsheet, you've got the X and Y axis on a spreadsheet, and you've got all the individual boxes, and across the top of the spreadsheet, let's call that the engine RPM, and then down the side is your throttle position. And so max RPM is at the far end of the top column, and then 100% wide open throttle is at the bottom end of the other column. And then everywhere in between, no matter where you are at a throttle position and an RPM, they're your X and Y cross, and that's a box. And so that is the box that the lookup table refers to figure out how much fuel to apply to that exact box. There's one other variable. The ECU uses some algorithms based on what the sensor data is telling it. So you've got coolant temperature sensor, air intake temperature sensor, and then the manifold pressure sensor of the bike. So it takes those other pieces of data and then applies sort of an overlay, an algorithm over the top of whatever the raw value is in that X and Y column. And then that's the amount of fuel, and that's the amount of ignition that it's going to apply in that exact real-time moment. And temperature affects it, and all. So the data from those other sensors that I talk about, it will skew that raw number up or down slightly based on the data and then the algorithm that's applied over the top of that. So why the Power Commander is so effective is because when we create the map for this, what we do is we run the bike, and then we look at the fueling. So the bike is, so we're capturing, we know what, the ECU knows what the sensor data is. So we bring the bike up to temp, we put it under load, we simulate all the things that are going to happen when you're out riding the bike, and then we look at what the AFR value is, the air-fuel ratio value is, in every specific cell. So we've run the bike through the entire throttle range, through the entire RPM range, and then we see where the fueling of the stock map is either rich or lean or exactly right. And then so we can spot adjust with the Power Commander every one of those cells. And that is why this is such a powerful tool, because we're correcting for every individual cell. And often the stock map in your stock ECU is way too rich. And there are plenty of times where we need to pull away. I've seen sometimes up to 18% in a cell or a range of cell, a block of cells, where the stock map is too rich, and so we're pulling away fuel. There are many cells where it's exactly right and we make no correction whatsoever. And then there's a bunch of cells where I've seen up to 49%, where we've had to add fuel in an individual cell or groups of cells because the stock map is too lean. Now, why would the stock map, say on an EXC, be so erratic? One of the primary reasons is the fact that the stock bike is submitted to regulatory agencies who run a battery of tests on it. They run emissions tests. They also run sound tests. There's a whole host of tests that they do to that bike. And so in some instances, the mapping is created in such a way that it is more favorable to the conditions of the test and less favorable then to the rider and to maybe his ride goals. So you see that there might be two objectives or two goals. You might have the manufacturer of the machine, and he's got specific objectives and benchmarks that he needs to achieve for compliance, and then you've got the rider, and his objectives are completely different. And in those instances, when the two are very different from each other, the rider may be dissatisfied by the ride dynamics or the performance of the bike. And something like an ECU will absolutely correct that, because the map, the fuel and ignition map, are strictly and only created for ride dynamics. When we add a fuel controller on like this, we are specifically optimizing fueling for ride dynamics. And that data sits over the top, the correction data sits over the top of the stock map. So the stock map is throughputting its injector signal into here, it's being corrected, and then that is what's being sent to the injector itself. And so we're interrupting it. We wire this in series with the injector, and so we're interrupting that signal, we're correcting it, and then we're sending it on to the injector downstream. So that's how a piggyback tuner works, and this is the best way to do that. There's a couple other cool things about the Power Commander that I think are worth noting. This has the ability, there's some accessory module screw holes up here on the top that would allow you to add a map switch, because these come from us, Taco Tune, and we've put in a map 2, which you can access through a toggle switch, and that is a lean, it's not a lean map, it's just an economy map. So you can toggle this thing with the map switch into economy mode, and then like on cruise range, you'll get, so we click down fueling something around 10% so that you get better fuel economy through the Power Commander. Now, if you're running this on a bike like an Xcf-w that has the factory traction control knob, well, it's not a knob, it's just the on and off button, and then it's got the two maps, the map 1 and map 2, then what we typically recommend to guys to do with that instance is to leave it in the power map, and then you can play around. You can toggle your bike in between map 1 and map 2 on the KTM switch and see which one you prefer. This thing is adapting to that. And then you could throw this, if you wanted to, into the map, into its own map 2, and that's the economy mode. So it can get complicated if you wanted to sort of play around and experiment with that, or screw it. Don't worry about that. Don't worry about the map switch. Just throw this on your bike, an Xcf-w, and then put it in race map, your power map, and then run it and don't think about it. So again, a lot of these things offer some levels of complexity and custom tailoring it to your bike that you might find very interesting if you wanted to go down those routes. Again, if you didn't, forget it, pretend it's not even there, just put it on your bike and go. Here's something that I think is a very cool feature with the Power Commander. We have the ability to throw on this add-on module and then go into an auto tune feature. So what happens here with this is we now add a 18mm wide band heated automotive grade fast response O2 sensor to your bike. So if you've got a 20+ bike, you have an O2 sensor on there. The difference is that is a 12mm slow responsive narrow band sensor. So that sensor on your 20+ bike is operating with the stock map and the stock ECU, and it's doing it in such a way that it's in effect really sort of a tattletale for pollution controls. So which is absolutely a good thing, and I appreciate that function and feature of it. it is, so when your bike is in closed loop, it is making fuel corrections. However, because of the limitations of the sensor, it's doing it at a much slower rate than if you had, say, this system on there with the Auto Tune and the wideband fast response O2 sensor. So now what can happen if you've got the Power Commander on your stock bike, you would remove the stock O2 sensor, you would install the wideband automotive grade sensor. You would need a different bung, and later on in the summer we're going to be rolling out, and you'll watch our YouTube channel, because when we come out with this, we'll break this down and show you what some of the options are. But this is coming soon. So what would happen is you can weld on a bung, a larger bung, the 18mm bung, onto your bike to get this set up with this enhanced upgraded O2 sensor. Or you could take your header to like a welding shop or a muffler shop in town, and then weld on the bung that we'll provide. They'll cut off the stock one, put on the aftermarket one, the Dynojet one, and then you can run this. So now what you've got is a bike in a situation where it doesn't matter what fuel you're running, it doesn't matter what altitude you're at, it doesn't matter what changes and mods you make. You can swap around exhaust, you could run the stock exhaust, you could run any aftermarket exhaust or any combination of any mods at any time, and the system will in real time self-adjust and auto-compensate fueling to the exact specific ratio that you've pre-set up. And so when we send these out, we're going to map those to optimal power. But Dynojet, as you know, is a very powerful tool, and they have a free software utility that you can download from their site, and then you can become if you wanted to. Again, and I've said this before, and I'll say it again. These are high-level features that if you want to go down these roads, they're available. If you don't, screw it, ignore it, don't do any of that. Just put this stuff on your bike, plug and play, and go ride. But it does give you the availability to download that software, and you can talk to your bike, and you can make your own enhancements to the fuel management that you would like. So if you're the kind of guy who was going to go and do some BDR stuff, and you wanted to really optimize your fueling for maximum fuel economy, and you wanted to take that ratio and push it a little higher, then you could go in, create a map for that, and then you'd have that available to you. And you could even toggle in between. You could throw the Dynojet map switch on there, and then you could run like normal ratio and then optimal ratio. So there's all kinds of really cool high-level things you could get into if you wanted to with a system like this, or ignore it and don't, and just put this on your bike. So the Power Commander is our favorite. Piggyback, because it offers really cool features, and the hardware is great, it's exceptional. The clock speed and the CPU speed in this is better than anything else for a piggyback tuner. So this is our number-one choice if you're going to go down the piggyback tuner road, because of these features. All of this is waterproof, it's all splash proof, it's submersible, everything we talk about here has those attributes. So price point on this stuff, $399 for the base piggyback tuner, and we ship these with our Taco Moto custom maps, so these are just plug and play, ready to go. And then if you wanted to add on the Auto Tune feature, that takes the entire set up to $688. So $688 for everything, all the bells and whistles with the Power Commander setup. Okay, so now we're looking at these tuners here. You've seen these before. These are very popular. These have been around a long time. This is a piggyback tuner. I'll let you take a little closer look at these. These are all made by the same company. These are made by Dobeck Engineering out of Belgrade, Montana. These are, if it's got the EJK sticker on here, this is marketed by Dobeck. They call it the Dobeck EKJ, Electronic Jet Kit. You can get these marketed by other guys. This one, I think, came from Best Dual Sports. This one is from JD Jetting. And I've seen these with FMF stickers on the front, Polaris. I think I saw once one with the Ducati sticker on there. So a lot of companies over the years have bought the Dobeck EJK, put their own sticker on them, and then marketed them as an in-house branded piggyback tuner. So what is going on in this device? This also, because it's a piggyback tuner, it interrupts, so it plugs into series on your fuel injector, and then so it's taking the injector signal, and then it's lengthening or shortening it here in the in the firmware, in the software of the device. I stumbled on my words because I wanted to say the map, but it's not a map. A piggyback tuner is not modifying. Well, it is modifying your map. But let me think about this for a second. The piggyback tuner is enhancing the existing map that you have, the signal that's already inside of your ECU. It's just changing it. It's like equalizer bars, if you want to think about it like that. We're just moving them up or down, and we're not reflashing the ECU. We're not doing anything to the software of the ECU. And in fact, I get asked often, what would happen if one of these were to fail outright, whether it's the Power Commander or the JD Tuner or the Dobeck EKJ, doesn't matter. There's two ways these could fail, and I've never seen a Power Commander fail. I've only seen one of these fail, and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds have been sold. Let's talk about reliability. This is my nice little spot to do that. The stock ECU, for many people, is the one that they think they like the most because it seems to be the most reliable. It's the one that the manufacturer put on the bike. It's OEM equipment. It's going to be the most reliable. In point of fact, I've seen more ECU failures with the stock ECU than I have with any of the aftermarket products, almost combined. I have never seen a Get ECU fail outright. I've seen 2 Wi-Fi comms fail, and they didn't fail, they just didn't allow you access with the password. So something got scrambled with the password, it was a software issue, fixed. I've seen no Vortex ECUs fail. Any failures with the Vortex or the Get that I have seen were software related, in that they went out to the customer with either the wrong map or no map, and that's happened with both of them. And you know, things screw up. We've done it too. We've shipped out Vortexes and we've shipped out Gets that either had a wrong map or no map, and then the bike didn't run or ran really terribly, and we figured out, oh, you've got the wrong map. Send it back, reflash it, send it back out. Mistakes happen. Not a failure. That was a human error. So that was not a failure of the product. That was a human error loading the map into it, and it was a simple fix. Just ship it back, we reflash it and send it out. And they didn't even get a chance to ride the bike because the bike, you know, they plugged it in and it just didn't work right. I've also seen that same human error happen with the stock bike. Now, when you get your stock bike, the dealer has to plug it into the dealer tool, and then they need to flash a run program into the ECU, because when the bike is shipped, the manufacturer puts in like a ticking time clock run mode, so that the bike will run at the factory, it'll run on the dyno, it'll run for in-house testing at the factory, and then it'll run when it gets to the dealer, because the dealer may want to start it up and move it around. And so there's a ticking clock of the time window that stock ECU will run the bike, and then it shuts down. I've seen it's happened many times where the dealer will forget to turn that off, and then the customer gets it home and he's 11 minutes or 21 minutes or whatever the run cycle time is, and then the bike dies and it's dead, and he has to go back to the dealer and they discover what's wrong. So human error. I have seen the stock Kaheen ECUs, I've seen in a couple of times, maybe 3 or 4 times, where these have malfunctioned and failed. So I'm just pointing out that, ironically, the most trouble prone of all of the ECU or all the aftermarket products is the stock ECU itself. I've seen more of them fail than any of the other setups. But I do understand, and I get it, there's a mindset that says this is what the factory put on, they know best, and I'm going to stick with that. And I'm okay with that concept. I'm just disabusing the concept, though, a little bit, of the reality that these are not the most reliable. In point of fact, it turns out these have had more failures than those other ones. But I will say this, the raw number of sales, so that if you looked at the data in terms of like how many of these there are versus how many of the aftermarket ones there are, then the point I'm trying to make becomes a little less valid, because there's just so many more of the stock ones than the aftermarket ones. So there's any number of ways to sort of slice into that data. That said, how this works, again, is we're not going into the software of the stock ECU. We're not changing, we're not going in here and reflashing any of this. So what's in this is not a map. This is the map. But this is just a correction. It's just changing the signal, right? We talked about that. So what's happening with the Dobeck EKJ is it's only looking at one piece of data. So this is why this is not our most favorite one, because it's considerably less capable, but it is still effective and it does a good job. It's also much cheaper. It's $249. I've seen these as low as $199 from different marketers. I've seen these as high as like almost $300, which is ridiculous. Don't pay $300 for these. Average price is like $229 to about $249. That's really the going rate. This looks at one piece of data. So all it's doing is it's plugging in series to the fuel injector. And so this thing then knows from this data, it knows RPM, because every time the injector fires, that is essentially a crankshaft revolution. And also, but here's one thing: the injector may fire it may fire a few times for each revolution. So there is quite a bit of intelligence that went into this, in that it's able to deduce RPM through maybe 3 blips per revolution, or maybe 4 or 6 or whatever it is. So when this gets set up, there's some good engineering that went into trying to calculate out. And this is what this device is doing, is it's calculating. So it's using algorithms to try to make deductions about fuel demand and then what you're asking for. So what this thing does is it takes the throttle sweep. This has 5 levels of fueling modification. It takes the throttle sweep, so you've got to make a circle out of it, 0 to 100%, wide open throttle. It takes that and it slices that into 5 sections, 5 slices of that pie, and there's 5 modes of programming for fuel enhancements. And then across the front here, you see a positive, a plus, and a negative, and then the mode. So when you buy this, it will come with an instruction sheet. And what makes these different from each other? Why is the JD different than this one and versus the FMF one or anybody else's? It's whoever set this up assigned, when you press the button, a plus or minus, then it assigns a percentage of fuel correction. And different marketers then will say, well, our button equals 1% change or 5% change. Or they'll also say, well, on ours, green equals a certain percentage of the fuel sweep, and then the red blue is a different one. And so they can change the way that the modes operate, and then the percentage of variation of the values. So the piece of hardware is the same, it operates in the same way, but the way it's programmed may be different from marketer to marketer. And so when you get these, you're going to want to follow the instructions. It will give the color coding of the mode, and then the value that you're going to want to click this up or down for the fuel correction of that mode or slice of the throttle pie, like we're talking about. So you wouldn't use the same programming values for the different marketers. You would stick with the programming sheet for the one that you got, the one that it came with. So now what's happening is this thing is looking at engine RPM, and then based on how fast, based on the engine RPM, this then applies its algorithm over what you've selected into the different mode settings. And then now, based on where you are in the RPM sweep, because of it does know the speed of the RPM, then it applies that level of fuel to that RPM range. And then it has these little transition zones of when you're moving through the throttle sweep, of how fast it applies the next bracket or the next slice of that pie, how much the fuel correction goes from range to range to range in the range of the 5 sections. So there's some good technology happening here. It is not accurate to the level that the Power Commander is accurate. The Power Commander is bang on. It's money on to wherever you are in RPM and throttle. This is not looking at true RPM data, because it's making a calculation of what the RPM is, whereas the Power Commander does know. It knows what your RPM is. It also knows what your throttle position is. We don't know where we're at with throttle position here. So the data collected is less, and so the performance is less. I can feel a bike when I'm running a Power Commander versus the EJK. Is it subtle enough, or is it noticeable for a casual everyday rider? No. So I don't want to make you think that you need to upgrade from an EJK to a Power Commander. That's not necessary. I'm just letting you know that there are differences in the way they feel, the way they operate, and the way they perform. And for certain riders, it would be noticeable. But look, it's $249, and for a lot of guys who just want to open up their exhaust, they want to turn their EXC into a race bike, and they're not an off-road bike, and they are not discriminating, then, and a lot of guys used to ride carbureted bikes with terrible jetting, and they didn't know any better. They you know, so tons of dudes out there just are happy to be on a motorcycle, and God bless them. So if $249 is the price point, you like that, and you don't need that ultra optimal level of performance, you don't care about any of those features, bam, this solves your problem. This is the way to go. This is, in our opinion, the best entry-level option. This is probably one of the most popular options because of its price point and because it's relatively simple. I hope I didn't overcomplicate. We do have a video about how to install this and set it up and then program it. It's much easier than maybe this little explainer. This is not the installation video. It only takes a couple of minutes to install. In 10 or 15 minutes, you've got this on, you've selected the values, and you're off and riding. So I did mention reliability, and let's drop back to that really quick. So if this thing were to fail, or the Dynojet Power Commander, if it were to fail, it could fail in one of two ways. It could fail where the bike would continue to run, meaning this thing has stopped functioning and it's stopped correcting the fueling. Your bike will just continue to run, but it's not being fuel corrected anymore by the device. Would you notice that? Well, you would notice it because the lights may be off, and both of these have sort of indicator lights. So the lights may be off. That would be one way. But you'd also very likely feel the fact that your bike now feels a little more sluggish. The performance has changed because you're not correcting for fuel anymore. So would you feel that if it failed? Yes, you should, and you probably will, and then the lights will be off. The other way this could fail is, and I don't know that I've ever seen it fail in this way, is where then it would fail and then the bike would not run because internally the injector signal is not being throughput from the ECU to the injector, and so then the injector is not firing. If that was the case, super unlikely, but if that was the case, you could just unplug this from your injector, plug the injector straight back into the stock harness, and away you go. This thing is completely bypassed. Exactly the same with a Power Commander. So there is really no fear about being stranded by a piggyback tuner, because if it did in fact fail outright and you were out there on the trail and your bike wouldn't start, you could just simply pass or fail check this by unplugging this, go back in, and if your bike runs, then, oh wow, I had a complete catastrophic failure of my piggyback. You can repair or replace that later, but that'll get you out and get you back on the trail. If you had a stock ECU that completely failed, you will know that the bike will not run. There are some dudes who get an aftermarket ECU and then they will continue to carry the stock ECU in their backpack, or I've even seen a guy who was able to put this in his airbox. He made a little he velcroed it essentially inside of his airbox as an ultimate fail-safe, just in case the aftermarket ECU were to fail. But again, I don't do that, and I have no problem with trusting completely a Vortex or a Get. I don't do that. But if you need to that level of, comfort for yourself, then that's fine. You can do that. So we've talked about the Vortex and the Get, and who those are for, and who, and the price points of those. Here's the run through of the piggyback tuners. So I think the last thing to talk about would be this little guy. Now this is something that's marketed by a company called, what the hell is it? Oh yeah, Booster Plug. So this little guy is a device, and it's very inexpensive. It's $159. So now we're at the bottom end. We started at the top with the Get, Vortex, Power Commander, the Dobeck EKJ, and now we're sort of here at the bottom. And what's going on with this thing is this little booster plug device, and I think it's a fairly clever concept. It plugs in series with the air intake, the intake air temperature sensor. So that's the little white thing you pull off you can see this on your bike when you pull off your air filter and you look through the intake runner. You'll see like there's a little white probe sticking up inside of the intake channel there, the intake tube, and that is your that's your air intake temperature sensor. So what this thing is doing is it plugs in series with that, and then it's got a variable resistor inside of here. And so it's spoofing the data that's coming out of the stock sensor, and then it's lowering the perceived temperature of the intake air. And when you have colder air, then essentially that sort of is putting the bike into like a choke. Like when you set the choke on your bike, like a carbureted bike, you throw on a choke, you're getting more gas. You're opening up an additional jet to enhance fueling, to give you more fuel. So this is doing the exact same thing electronically. So it's spoofing that data, and then the ECU is thinking that the air is colder than it is, and so it's adding a bit more fuel. I think that has some merit. What is clever about this device is the fact that it has this little ambient air temperature probe. You put this somewhere on the bike where it's seeing clean air, not affected or polluted by like radiator air or engine temperature. So you want to get this high up on the bike. And then what's happening with this is then this is sliding and adjusting the spoof ratio based on what the ambient air temperature is. So it's not a fixed resistor, it's a variable resistor. There are guys who have been doing sort of mods like this for years on fuel injected cars and fuel injected machines, and they'll use a fixed resistor, and then what that does is it gives you then a percentage boost, but it's doing it across the entire throttle range and temperature range, ambient air temperature range. I think what's clever about this is it's got a ambient temperature sensor, so it can self-calibrate and self-adjust to ambient temperature. Some of the downsides to this, we got this and we tried it on a couple of different bikes, KTM 500s, and we saw no net effect. And we ran this on the dyno, and then we also road test this, and so we did not see any fueling correction happening on the data on the dyno, and then we didn't feel any noticeable difference with this on the bike. I will say though that when one of the sessions of testing this, it was in the winter and it was very cold, and the bike seemed to start better and a little easier with this on when it was very cold outside. So that was something that we did notice about this. Another thing that I think that is not, in my opinion, the reason I don't optimally go for something like this or a fuel correction device like this, and we talked about this a minute ago, is when you've got something, there is intelligence in these. There is no doubt there is intelligence in these. What these are doing is they're just looking at whatever the stock data output is. So remember how we talked about sometimes the manufacturer will put a fuel map in here that is specifically generated just to meet a regulatory's agency's compliance review of that bike. So that data that's coming out is just being modified without any intelligence in either one of these to whether that data is good or not. With a Power Commander, we're looking at that data, and then we're using spot-specific intelligence to say that data is lacking, or it's over or undercompensating in these specific areas, and then we correct for that. These are just taking that data straight out, and whether it's good or bad, it doesn't know. It's just they're just enhancing that data, and so they're making spots that are already richer. They're taking spots that are lean, and they are making them richer, but without the optimization of the intelligence to know how much specifically to increase them. And that's why I mentioned earlier, that's why I can feel a difference when I ride a bike with something like this versus a Power Commander. You can tell the difference, and that's specifically why. So these are, again, and you just understand that this has a great price point and this does a very good job, and for a lot of guys this is exactly what they're looking for, exactly good enough, and I have no problem with these. We sell a lot of these, and I like these little guys. This, on the other hand, I just wasn't able to make any determination about its effectiveness. So we don't sell these. I'm not going to sell these. We don't carry these because I just didn't find any value overall for this. I do like the concept of it. I like the simplicity of it, but it's not something we're using or recommending. So that, and I guess you could call this a piggyback too. Now, I'm willing to learn, and if you have one of these in your bike and you have noticed through AFR ratios that this does make improvements, and you notice on your bike that this is doing something for you, please let me know that. We didn't get any results out of it, but I'd like to hear some feedback and input about that. Now let me finish up by just talking about what you could do, or what you used to be able to do with the stock ECU. So you had your US spec bike, and once upon a time you used to be able to get something from dealers called the Auto Tune, and then you also have guys who can reflash so let's call that jailbroken. Okay, now we know if you have a cell phone, your cell phone, like an Apple phone, is locked, and then you can't go in and make high-level user changes or function changes, but you can take your phone and have a guy jailbreak it, right? So if you understand what I'm saying, I'm not going to explain any of that, but if you understand, then you're on the same wavelength with me. KTM used to have the option in their dealer tool. Once upon a time, they used something called the Xc-f, and that was the piece of hardware and software package that the dealer would plug into your bike, and then he would interrogate the ECU, and then he could look at trouble codes and make map changes or upload maps to your bike. So the Xc-f tool back in the day, when you would plug in a US spec bike, then it would say, oh, you have a 500, it's a US spec 500. Here are several different map options that you can send to this bike. Which one would you like to send? And so by doing that, a dealer then could send like the European map, and the European map didn't have certain emission components on it, and the European map also had just a little bit better fueling in the low range. So back in the day, and specifically in the 17 through 19 bikes, the Xc's and then the FE's on the Husky side, those bikes ran very poorly off idle. They had a coffin stall, a very, very abrupt coffin stall stumble, flame out, and some idling issues and hard starting issues. And so what some enterprising dealers realized is if they loaded those bikes, those US bikes, with that European map, then it kind of corrected and fixed, in most instances, those issues. Now, they were not supposed to be doing that, but there was no real sort of check on that, on their doing that. If they got audited by KTM, they might have to explain, well, we did some of those, but those were, and they might say those are race bikes or whatever. So there were ways that could happen, and the fact is it could happen. If you had that map, then it was essentially unlocked your ECU, and you could take that and you could send it to some really clever guys like Chris Blaze Racing or Chip Munn Racing, and they could plug your ECU into something called the KTM UST, the user setting tool, and that would allow them then grid level access, spreadsheet, like again, we kind of referred to that earlier. It would allow them like spreadsheet level access where they could go into the stock ECU and then make ignition and fuel changes to modify that to give you better performance. They could only do that, you can only do that if the ECU has been like unlocked or jailbroken, like we said. So with the KTM Xc-f tool, that was possible. There's a ton of bikes out there. There's a ton of bikes that have been reflashed. There's a lot that have the Euro map. Now the Euro map is super overrated. It does not provide really good clean fueling for a bike that's been modified. The reeds have been taken out. The aftermarket exhaust fueling is not optimized with just the base Euro tune. It's better than the US tune, but it doesn't fully compensate for all those mods as well as it could. So you'd take that jailbroken ECU, send it to Chris Blaze or Chris Munn, they would throw in a very good optimized map, and then you'd have a much better performing bike. KTM sunsetted the Xc-f that had that loophole, and then they introduced, now all dealers are running on the Xc-f, and that when you take your US spec bike and you plug it into the Xc-f, it says, oh, that's a VIN, that's a US VIN, and it gives you no available options other than the exact stock EPA US 50-state map that is only required to be uploaded to this ECU. There's no options, there's no back door, there's nothing. So the door is closed for that Euro tune, right? The Euro map, that's done, it's over with. If you have one of those, you've got an ECU that is valuable, and I've seen these on eBay where guys are selling them because, like I said, you can take that stock box and then reflash it. And so if you're the kind of guy, you've heard everything we've said, and you just insist that I want the stock ECU, but I want one that has programming capabilities, then what you really need, but yours isn't, then you need to find yourself one of those unlocked ECUs and then send it out and have it reflashed. So very limited on what's possible and available with the stock ECU. Let me throw one last thing in here because I get asked this fairly often. What about playing around with the TPS. So there's two different generations of ECUs, and on the previous generation, there was some boost to almost like how the Euro Tune boosts up the stock map over the US map with a little better fueling down low and then a little easier starting. So on the 12 through 16 bikes that use the previous generation slower chipset ECUs, those did respond. In fact, those did respond fairly well. If you would take the stock TPS setting is 0.6 volts. And if you bump that up maybe 2 or 3 or 4 tenths of a volt to 6.4, 6.5, 6.6, then the bike would exhibit some of those better attributes for starting, idling, and then some of the low throttle angle responsiveness. And that was a thing. But it's not a tune. So those bikes, the 12 through 16 bikes, had arguably better fueling across the range anyway. You're just making it a little bit better with that generation of bike. And there's a ton of guys out there running open exhaust and other things with the TPS tweaked, the TPS hack bike, and they're fairly happy with it. You throw them on the dyno and you look at the AFR and it's not optimal and there's more meat on the bone. So if you've got the TPS hack and you're happy with it, then who's to say, just continue to run that. Know that there's more meat on that bone. If you were to set the TPS back to stock and then run something else like a piggyback tuner, you'd be shocked and amazed and really pleased at what you would gain with better fuel correction technology than just the TPS hack. But there was some effectiveness to it. So you've heard me say time and time again, don't screw around with your TPS. And I'm kind of going back on that just a tiny bit specific to that 12 through 16 generation bikes. Now here's where my sort of preaching against that clicks in and is in full effect. That's when you have a 17 plus. So when you have the newer generation ECU with the newer generation throttle body, the TPS hack, the efficacy of that falls away dramatically. In fact, when you do that TPS hack on the 20 plus bikes, the bike is unrideable. It's completely unrideable. On the 17 through 19 generation bikes, it did make it a little bit easier to start, but it absolutely fell away. And the other thing that, and we've already mentioned this, there are some inherent weaknesses to the stock map in its fueling. And when you do that TPS hack, you're just exacerbating, you're making, what's happening is it's making those weak points worse. It's exacerbating those. So I am not an advocate for the TPS hack. However, I'm a little compassionate to it on the 12 through 16 generation bikes, but you just cannot, it's just not possible to do it on the 17 plus bikes. And it's, and like I said, on the 20 plus bikes, they just don't even run when you do it. So that's sort of that overview of what's going on if you run the stock ECU. And then let me just look at my notes here. I think that's pretty much it. If you have any questions about anything we've talked about, any of these products, the way to use them, the way to program them, the way to set them up, please let us know. Send us an email, shoot us a text. Best ways to get a hold of us. I help guys all the time with problems with these products that they have bought from other people. I do not mind helping you troubleshoot your bike or your ECU tuning issue when you've purchased it from somewhere else. I don't care. This is a sport. I'm a sportsman. You're a sportsman. I think good sportsmanship requires of sportsmen to be courteous and to be helpful where possible. And I am happy to do that and to be helpful for you with the bike and the problems that you're having with it, regardless of where you got it. Obviously, we'd love it if you got your product from us and you could support us in that way. You could support the work that we do and the education that we're trying to provide. I think ultimately, at the end of the day, ours is an education channel, and what we're doing is trying to educate and inform. And then we also have our own products and things that we do. By purchasing from us, it helps support us and helps us to do more of this. So we appreciate your patronage and watching our channel. Also, that helps us too. So like and subscribe. Let us know in the comments if you have a favorite. I hear from you all the time about what you think of these different products. Let us know in the comments what you like and what you're riding. And if you have any questions about changing platforms from one thing to something else, we can help you out there too. Thank you for watching. And as always, go out and get some adventure.